What happens to a dream when it is buried under the weight of survival? Does it fade away forever? Or does it wait patiently like a seed hidden in the soil, waiting for the right season to bloom? For Ernesto, a 68-year-old carpenter from a small village in the Philippines, the answer had always been silence. His life had been defined by the sound of hammers striking nails, saws slicing through wood, and the quiet satisfaction of finishing another home for someone else. His hands were strong but worn, etched with deep lines from decades of labor. They had built roofs to shelter families, tables where meals would be shared, and cribs where babies would sleep. But in building for others, he had slowly dismantled his own dream. Long before he became known as Lolo Ernesto, he was a young man who loved to sing. His voice once filled rice fields and fishing docks, carried by the wind as he worked alongside his father. Neighbors would pause to listen, smiling at the rare gift hidden in his song. But dreams, no matter how beautiful, are often no match for hunger and responsibility. When his father passed, Ernesto picked up tools instead of microphones, trading melodies for survival. The years passed quickly. Children grew, bills piled up, and his voice became something he used only while humming quietly in the workshop, a secret he shared with wood and sawdust. He never complained, never asked what might have been, but in the solitude of night, when the world was asleep, he sometimes wondered, what if? It was Maya, his granddaughter, who noticed. She saw how his eyes glimmered when old songs played on the radio. She heard him when he thought no one was listening, and she believed deeply that the world deserved to hear what he had locked away for so long. One evening, she held his calloused hands and told him about America's Got Talent. Ernesto laughed, dismissing it as impossible. He was too old, too ordinary, too far away. But her words planted a seed, one that would change everything. Because sometimes even forgotten dreams find a way back to the light. When Ernesto finally agreed to audition, it felt less like a decision and more like stepping into a dream he never thought was his. The night he filled out the audition form with Maya's help, his hands trembled not from age, but from disbelief. He was a carpenter, a man of wooden nails, not of lights and stages. Yet something deep inside whispered that it was time. The days leading up to the audition were filled with quiet preparation. In the mornings, he still worked in his workshop, shaping beams and sanding tables. But in the evenings, he sang. His voice cracked at times, rusty from years of silence. But it carried a raw honesty that even Maya couldn't listen to without tears in her eyes. The journey from their small town to America was overwhelming. Ernesto had never been on a plane before. As he sat by the window, he gazed at the clouds, his reflection faint on the glass. He thought about all the carpenters who had lived and died unknown, their hands remembered only by the wood they shaped. Would he be the same, or was his flight a bridge to something greater? When he arrived at the AGT venue, he felt dwarfed by the towering stage lights, the buzzing crowd, and the endless cameras. Contestants with glittering costumes and confident smiles brushed past him. Some stretched their voices in warm-ups, others practiced dance moves. Ernesto stood quietly in his worn shirt and old shoes, clutching his guitar like an anchor. He looked out of place, an old man in a sea of shining youth. But Maya stayed beside him, her eyes shining with faith. She told him he belonged here as much as anyone else. Slowly, he began to believe it. As the staff called his name, he took a deep breath, each step toward the stage echoing louder than any hammer he had swung. For the first time in his life, Ernesto wasn't building for others. He was about to build something for himself. The stage lights blazed down on Ernesto as he stepped forward, his guitar pressed tightly against his chest. The massive hall stretched endlessly before him, filled with strangers, cameras, and a silence so heavy it made his heart pound. He had built countless homes in his lifetime, but never had he felt so small, so exposed, as he did in that moment under the glow of America's Got Talent. The judges sat in their chairs, their faces unreadable. Simon leaned back, eyes sharp, studying the man who looked more like a grandfather watching over a family gathering. Then a star stepping into the spotlight. The audience whispered, curious but doubtful. Many thought they had seen this before, an old man with a dream, fragile and fading. Few expected much. Ernesto adjusted the strap of his guitar, his callous fingers brushing the strings as if greeting an old friend. For a second, his mind threatened to retreat. He could almost hear the doubt. You're too old. You don't belong here. This stage isn't for men like you. But then, somewhere in the audience, his eyes found Maya. She was smiling through tears, her small hands pressed together as if in prayer. In that gaze, Ernesto found courage. The first notes trembled, his voice soft and unsure, like a flame struggling against the wind. The crowd leaned in, some with polite patience, others ready to dismiss. But then, something shifted. The cracks in his voice gave way to depth, and the trembling grew into strength. Every line carried decades of untold stories of sacrifice, of nights spent hungry, of mornings spent working while dreams waited in silence. It wasn't just a song. It was a life poured into melody. His voice rose and fell like waves on the shore, carrying with it the ache of all the years he had hidden away his gift. The hall grew still, breaths held, eyes fixed. Even Simon, known for his stern composure, leaned forward, his expression softening with every note. By the time Ernesto reached the final line, there was no sound in the theater except for his voice. And when the last note faded into silence, the stillness broke into thunder. The audience rose to their feet, not just for the song, but for the man who had finally found his moment. As the final note dissolved into silence, Ernesto lowered his guitar, his chest rising and falling as if he had just released a lifetime's worth of breath. For a heartbeat, the room was still. No one moved. The silence felt almost sacred, as though the world had stopped to honor the sound of a Carpenter's soul. Then it came the eruption. The audience leapt to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping their own eyes. The energy washed over Ernesto like a wave, but he stood quietly, almost stunned, as if he couldn't believe the applause was for him. For decades, his only reward had been a steady paycheck of carpentry, the satisfaction of finishing a home. Now, the applause of thousands roared through his chest, louder than any hammer strike. The camera shifted to the judges. Heidi clapped with a hand pressed to her heart. Sophia's eyes glistened as she whispered to the others. But it was Simon who drew all eyes. Known for his steel demeanor and unforgiving critiques, he sat frozen, his gaze locked on Ernesto. His lips trembled as though words were too heavy to form. And then, against all expectation, Simon's eyes filled with tears. He blinked hard, lowering his head for a moment, but the emotion could not be hidden. When he finally looked up again, there was no trace of the usual critic, only a man who had been deeply moved. He pressed the microphone button before him, his voice breaking slightly as he spoke of the truth and purity in Ernesto's performance. He admitted he hadn't expected it, hadn't seen it coming, but could not deny what he felt. Then, with a suddenness that shocked the hall, Simon reached forward and slammed his palm onto the golden buzzer. The sound reverberated like thunder, and in an instant, golden confetti rained down from above, shimmering in the stage lights. Ernesto looked up, his eyes wide, the golden flakes landing on his worn shoulders like blessings from the heavens. Maya burst into tears in the crowd, her small body trembling with pride. In that golden shower, the carpenter who once built homes for others had finally built his own miracle. When the last of the golden confetti drifted to the stage floor, Ernesto stood motionless, his eyes scanning the audience as though searching for proof that it was real. His hands, once steady enough to carve wood with precision, now shook beneath the weight of a dream fulfilled. He had never imagined himself here, an old carpenter standing in a storm of gold, applauded by strangers, honored by the very world he thought had forgotten men like him. Backstage, the embrace of his granddaughter brought him to tears. Maya clung to him tightly, whispering words he didn't need to hear to understand. She had always believed in him, even when he had no belief left in himself. It was her faith that had carried him across oceans and onto that stage, and in that moment, he realized he hadn't sung alone. Her love had been in every note,